The Cold War was a time of great tension and rivalry, a period marked by a constant state of political and military tension between two global superpowers. It lasted for almost 50 years, from the end of World War II until the early 1990s. This era saw the world divided into two distinct spheres of influence, each led by a superpower. Two superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union. These nations represented opposing ideologies and political systems, each vying for global dominance. They never directly fought each other, but the threat of nuclear war was always present. The arms race led to the stockpiling of nuclear weapons, creating a precarious balance of power known as mutually assured destruction. The Cold War was more than just a military standoff. It was a complex and multifaceted conflict that influenced every aspect of life, from politics to culture. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle between two very different ways of life. Propaganda played a significant role in shaping public perception and maintaining support for each side's cause. The United States championed democracy and capitalism, promoting individual freedoms and a market-driven economy as the path to prosperity and peace. The Soviet Union promoted communism, a system that sought to create a classless society. They believed in state control of resources and the means of production to achieve equality. This global struggle had a profound impact on the world. It influenced international policies, led to the formation of military alliances, and sparked numerous proxy wars in various regions. It divided Europe, sparked regional conflicts, and fueled an arms race that threatened humanity's very existence. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis were just a few of the flashpoints during this period. The Cold War cast a long shadow, shaping international relations for decades to come. Its legacy can still be felt today in the geopolitical landscape and the ongoing quest for global stability and peace. The roots of the Cold War can be traced back to the closing years of World War II. Though the United States and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany, their alliance was one of convenience, not shared ideology. Mutual suspicion and distrust grew between the two nations. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, sought to expand its influence in Eastern Europe. The United States, fearing Soviet expansionism, aimed to contain communism and promote democracy. These competing goals created a climate of fear and suspicion. The development of atomic weapons further heightened tensions. The United States' monopoly on nuclear weapons was short-lived. The Soviet Union soon developed its own atomic bomb, creating a dangerous nuclear stalemate. The early years of the Cold War were marked by a series of events that solidified the division between East and West. In 1948, the Soviets blockaded Berlin, attempting to starve the city into submission. The United States responded with the Berlin Airlift, a massive humanitarian effort that provided supplies to West Berlin by air. The following year, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed, a military alliance between the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations. This alliance was countered by the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance of Soviet-controlled Eastern European countries, formed in 1955. The division of Europe was now complete. An Iron Curtain, as Winston Churchill famously described it, had descended across the continent, separating East from West. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred in October 1962, was the most dangerous confrontation of the Cold War. It was a period marked by intense fear and uncertainty as the world watched two superpowers edge closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation. The stakes were incredibly high, and the decisions made during those critical days would shape the course of history. The crisis was sparked by the Soviet Union's decision to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from US soil. This bold move was seen as a direct threat to American national security and provoked a swift and severe response from the United States government. The discovery of these missile sites through aerial reconnaissance photos sent shockwaves through the American public and its leadership. For 13 tense days, the world held its breath as the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of nuclear war. The global situation was incredibly tense, with people around the world anxiously following the news, fearing the worst. The possibility of a nuclear conflict loomed large, and the fate of millions hung in the balance. President John F. Kennedy imposed a naval blockade on Cuba and demanded the removal of the missiles. This decisive action was intended to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment to Cuba and to force the Soviet Union to back down. Kennedy's address to the nation was a pivotal moment as he outlined the gravity of the situation and the steps the United States would take to ensure its security. Through a combination of diplomacy and military brinkmanship, a solution was reached. Intense negotiations took place behind the scenes, with both sides seeking to avoid a catastrophic conflict. The role of diplomacy was crucial, as it provided a way for both superpowers to step back from the edge and find a mutually acceptable resolution. The Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba, and the United States secretly agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey. This agreement was a significant de-escalation of the crisis and marked a turning point in the Cold War. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrated the importance of communication and compromise in international relations. The Cuban Missile Crisis served as a stark reminder of the terrifying potential for nuclear war. It highlighted the need for careful management of international tensions and the importance of maintaining open lines of communication between rival nations. The lessons learned from this crisis continue to resonate today, reminding us of the fragile nature of global peace and the ever-present need for vigilance and diplomacy. Section 5. Democracy versus communism, ideological differences. At the heart of the Cold War was a fundamental clash of ideologies. The United States championed democracy, a system of government where power rests with the people. Capitalism, with its emphasis on free markets and individual initiative, was seen as the economic engine of democracy. The Soviet Union, in contrast, promoted communism, an ideology that sought to create a classless society where all property was collectively owned. Individual liberties were often suppressed in the name of the collective good. The Soviets argued that communism was a more equitable system than capitalism. These ideological differences fueled mistrust and animosity between the two superpowers. Each side saw the other as a threat to its very existence. Section 6. Proxy wars and proxy players, the Cold War's global reach. The Cold War was not confined to Europe. It was a global struggle for power and influence between the United States and the Soviet Union. It spread throughout the globe, igniting conflicts in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These regions became battlegrounds for ideological supremacy. These proxy wars were often fought between local forces backed by either the United States or the Soviet Union. The superpowers provided military aid, training, and advisors to their respective allies. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 was one of the earliest and most intense conflicts of the Cold War, and the Vietnam War from 1954 to 1975 was another prolonged and devastating conflict. These were two of the most significant proxy wars of the Cold War, drawing in numerous countries and resulting in massive casualties. Both conflicts resulted in devastating losses of life, with millions of soldiers and civilians killed or wounded, and left lasting scars on the countries involved. The destruction and trauma from these wars affected generations. The Cold War also fueled arms races in various regions. Nations scrambled to build up their arsenals. Countries sought to acquire the most advanced weapons, believing that military superiority was essential for survival, fearing that falling behind would leave them vulnerable to attack. This relentless pursuit of military dominance defined much of the Cold War era. Section 7. Cracks in the Iron Curtain, the beginning of the end. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was beginning to show signs of strain. Its economy was stagnant, its military overextended, and its people were growing weary of the restrictions imposed by communist rule. The election of Mikhail Gorbachev as General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985 marked a turning point. Gorbachev introduced reforms known as perestroika and glasnost, aimed at restructuring the Soviet economy and increasing political openness. However, these reforms proved difficult to implement and ultimately contributed to the unraveling of the Soviet system. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. Section 8, A World Transformed. The Legacy of the Cold War. The Cold War officially ended in 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the decades-long rivalry had left an indelible mark. The Cold War shaped the geopolitical landscape of the late 20th century. It led to the formation of military alliances, the division of Europe, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. It also had a profound impact on technology, culture, and everyday life. The end of the Cold War brought both challenges and opportunities. The world was no longer divided into two opposing camps, but new threats emerged, such as terrorism, ethnic conflict, and climate change. Section 9. Conclusion, Echoes of the Cold War. The Cold War may be over, but its legacy continues to shape the world today. The rivalry between the United States and Russia persists, though it is different in nature from the ideological struggle of the Cold War. The threat of nuclear war, though diminished, remains a concern. The lessons learned from the Cuban Missile Crisis, a testament to the importance of diplomacy and restraint, are as relevant as ever. The Cold War was a defining chapter in human history, a period of both peril and progress. Understanding the Cold War is essential to understanding the complexities of the world we live in today.